And Benji went ahead and hit record. Good deal.
So I am going to start spotlighting you, Zach, and we'll start introducing people as we go along. So I think we are good to begin.
Awesome. Hello, everybody. I'm so excited for tonight. This is like a really exciting tasting, and it comes from, as we've done this so many times, thanks to all of you wonderful people, we keep trying to add a little bit more education, a little more content. And I really think tonight is like going to be very special. So we're diving into Taste Like Tradition. We're going to talk about a bunch of terms that we use maybe often, depending on what kind of shopper you are. We hear terms like biodynamic, regenerative, all these different things. We're hopefully going to define some of these terms. We have a couple really cool experts tonight, as I keep mentioning. So Nadine is representing the beautiful red wine we have tonight, and she is a rep from that company. She's going to explain a lot of that. We have Melissa, the cheesemaker from Idyll Farms, and Amy, the owner of Idyll Farms, some of our absolute favorite people in Michigan cheese. And then we have Kim from Mongers Provisions, who's going to be walking us through a lot of this. Kim has a tremendous amount of background. She joined us in November, and we're so thankful. She came from over a decade at Whole Foods, and she grew up in a farming world. And as she pointed out when we were talking before this, not the kind of farming world that we're going to talk about tonight, more of a conventional farming, but it influenced her to get a permaculture design certificate. And so she's going to be our kind of Mongers resident expert on some of these terms and kind of walk us through some of the farming practices. I know for me, someone who's obsessed about all these foods for so long, I think there's often a disconnect from us folks who don't live on farms and don't have a sense of like what it really takes to make our food. And we often get trapped in these words, oh, I want organic. And what does it mean to actually make a cheese organic is very different than growing an apple organic. And so hopefully tonight, some of the actual people who do this work will give us a lot more information and help answer some of our questions. So that's our goal for the night. My name is Zach Berg, for anybody who has not been on a tasting before with us. I am the head cheesemonger and co-owner at Mongers Provisions. We have Benji with us, the monger behind the Mongers, as always, as well as Kim and everybody else I mentioned. Tonight, we're going to start with these two wines. We'll walk through each cheese, tasting them individually, but I always encourage you, try things. Don't wait for us to talk about them. The only thing I would say is, don't eat everything before we get to it. It's always disappointing when you're like staring at an empty hole on your board and we're talking about dancing fern. So go ahead and try things, nibble, enjoy yourself, and ask questions. This tasting experience is always best when it's a conversation. So if you're comfortable with chat, use the chat. If you're comfortable with unmuting yourself and asking a question aloud, we love that too. That is all the housekeeping I can think of. Does anybody have any early questions before we dive into it all?
Looks like we are good.
Cool. I live in Birmingham, so if you hear the Woodward Crews, I apologize, everybody. It's real by my house. A lot of revving engines, so they're excited too. That's why. Okay, diving in, we have beautiful wines tonight, and the one I'm going to talk about is the Falanghina. I've kind of fallen in love with this wine variety and this company. So La Capranera is named after the little black goat, and it's a goat that is indigenous to this area. And this company is really focused on that idea of like what makes their area special, right? And I think that tonight we're really talking about that in general, right? All of this beautiful farming is a response to like what you have in front of you, right? Using your resources. And what's cool about this company, and what I think is cool about this company, I should say, is that's what they focus is on indigenous grape varieties, not just indigenous goat varieties. And so Falanghina is super popular in this area in southern Italy. And they're not just making another Pinot Grigio, they're making Falanghina, and their reds follow suit. They're only working with indigenous grapes from southern Italy. I just think that especially this time of year, it has that perfect balance of like dry, crisp, lemony, but like a big burst of tropical fruit while still being very dry. There's enough fruit for those of us who don't necessarily love dry wine that I think enough fruit to trick the palate, but it's totally a dry wine that's delicious. And I'm going to pass it to Nadine because, as I alluded to earlier, there's a lot of pronunciation issues there. And I'm going to let the expert go ahead.
Hey guys, how's everyone doing tonight? Thank you so much, Zach, for hosting me. You can hear me, right?
Perfectly.
Okay, I have a 7 and a 5-year-old running around bananas, so I apologize for any disruptions in my video. So I'm a representative. I'm one of the brand managers here in the US for Babylonstoren, the winemakers for the Soetmelksvlei, which we can go over that pronunciation again in a minute. Here in the United States, there are 4 of us, so it's kind of a small team, and we've been importing Babylonstoren's wine since 2015. In addition to the Soetmelksvlei, we have about 8 other wines that we carry here in the US, but I'm going to focus tonight mainly on this one. And as Zach mentioned, the organic farming practices, both in the vineyard and in the garden that Babylonstoren has. So Zach has given me the ability to share my screen. So I'm going to share my screen because I really think I can talk about it all you guys want, but in reality, the pictures will do more justice for this. So Zach, I can do that, right?
Totally.
Okay.
We even tested it before you got here.
Yeah, let me just make sure that I'm sharing what I want to share.
Always
Right. That's like always like the scary thing. It's like, what should I share with you? There's so many secrets I have. Okay, hold on a second. Okay. And of course okay. Okay. Okay, so I think you're seeing, I don't know what you're seeing. You might be seeing, what are you
Bitter
seeing?
liquor.
We're seeing
Oh, bitter liquor.
Which
Okay.
we love.
Sounds good. Okay, this is not,
Available at the store.
what about this? This is what I want you to see. The other one?
Yeah. About
Okay.
the winemaker. Yeah, you're good.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So, so Babylonstoren, for those of you who don't know, is located in the Western Cape of South Africa, about 25 miles east of Cape Town. And so just so you can kind of get an overview, like almost the drone image, I would say, of what Babylonstoren looks like and encompasses is right what I have before you. I know you're seeing my entire screen. I'm not going to go into presentation mode or anything for this because, we're not that fancy of people here. But you can kind of get an overview and see how beautiful the garden and the vineyards are. So Babylonstoren is the heart and soul of Babylonstoren, I would say, is this garden here. This, in addition to other areas of farm, encompass about 8 acres of beautiful just farm and garden. And our winemaker, who I will introduce you just, in the presentation to in a minute, always jokes that the wine is thought of second or third, because there's so much going on at Babylonstoren that it's just so beautiful. The wine is also beautiful, but you'll also see that they really focus on these organic farming practices in their garden. So just to give you a little bit more insight to where things are, move that over there, to where things are at Babylonstoren. So if you're on the Cape in Cape Town, and you drive inland about 25 miles, you'll get to this like triangulated area between Stellenbosch, Parle, and Franschhoek. And then to kind of zoom in here, you can see along the Simonsberg Mountains, or really just around the Simonsberg Mountains here, you can see all these different vineyards. And so it's a really beautiful area. Also, mainly like I would say that Mediterranean climate that really encompasses the area, because in South Africa, if you are aware of how many different like effects, like Cape effects, Benguela effects occur in this area, and how mountainous and how flat it can be, and how elevation changes, there are so many different varietals and grape types that can be grown in this region. So we have the protection of the Simonsberg Mountain here, but we also have the benefit of most of our vineyards being on the slope of the mountains. And so for those of you that are aware of like slope and slope effects, so we are in the southern hemisphere, so most of our slopes are like northerly facing, but they're not, I wouldn't say, because of the climate, they're drenched in sun but not baked. And they get really beautiful sun and then cool mountain air in the evenings. So it's a really good balance of keeping that really delicious acidity with keeping really, really delicious fruit at the same time combination. So just to kind of give you some backstory there. So what I have highlighted here for you guys tonight is you can see Babylonstoren, and next to it is Backsburg, which is a farm that we acquired a couple years ago. And this entire area in the 1690s was all called Babylonstoren. And so because they referred to this conical hill on the property as Tower of Babel. So over the years, over the centuries, really, it was, I would call it, diluted and sold in bits and pieces off. But the now owners, Karen Roos and her husband Koos Becker, they, which is cool because yes, it's a couple who owns it, but Karen, the wife, makes a lot of the decisions. So it's awesome working for a woman-owned company who has like a lot of intention and design and creativity behind what's going on at the farm. And so Backsburg is the adjacent farm, which we just purchased. And that's where the grapes for the Soetmelksvlei were grown. And the story behind that is that land, I mean, all around this area is, as you can see, just super beautiful. And so Koos and Karen really want to buy other aspects of this farm up. And it's not because they're like greedy and they want to do it, but they really want to transform the area back to kind of what it was in the late 1690s, where you have this 17th century feel, and it's all these like Cape Dutch buildings and things like that. So Soetmelksvlei in Afrikaans translates directly, and on the bottle it says land, translates loosely to the land of milk and honey, which is not off, but the direct translation is sweet milk oasis. But I didn't think that was going to be too good for marketing, so we kept it as the land of milk and honey. And so, but in reality, Koos and Karen were really pining for this land over and over because of how beautiful it was, because of the trellis grapes, because of the old vines. And this is what you get in the SMV, as we call it here in the States, or the Soetmelksvlei. So these grapes, they're super, like, they're some of the thicker skin, they're the waxiest grapes. They're just the most beautiful grapes that Backsburg had at the time. We were able to harvest and now make into this beautiful wine. And Charles, our winemaker, says that only the next vintages will be even more beautiful and even more beautiful. So the farming practices at Babylonstoren are, in the garden, organic, and in the vineyards, sustainable. So we have to follow by a process, a South African, the WOSA, like the wines of South Africa processes for sustainable wine and certified wine. So I think in here, you guys can see this seal here. All of our wine has to be, or is certified. We get it certified through the IPW, and it's a process where the government of South Africa comes in and they test the wine. They test the wine for like organic principles. They test the wine for making sure that it is actually the vintage and the varietals that they claim it to be. It's very serious and it's very taxing on our team, and our team is small, but they want to share this wine with the world, so they don't care. So the other thing is, I know like a lot of people say, like hand harvest and machine harvest, there isn't much difference, but because Babylonstoren wants to keep a lesser imprint on the earth, they don't do any machine harvesting. So we do a lot of hand harvesting and then also hand sorting. So you wonder why a wine this beautiful can be. And if you've tasted any of our other wines or any other products, they really go into a lot of detail into selecting which berries go into which wines, because they only want the best fruit possible. So that's a little bit about the wine practices. I know I'm probably talking a lot, so I'm going to try to speed it up here a little bit. Sorry, I'm from Philly, so when I get nervous, I talk a little fast. Okay, so the pictures, I'm not really trying to hide. You guys are just like in my production space right now, so because we're cool. So this is just a snapshot of what you can experience at the farm. It's just 8 acres of beautiful, like, fruits and vegetables, and you can literally walk and pick. They encourage you to pick and eat anything out, like any fruits, any herbs, any vegetables. We also have chickens and Chianina cows, which we have a butcher shop on site. We have chickens on site. we have 3 restaurants on the property. So this is actually a snapshot of our tasting room. Like, how beautiful is that, right? It's quite incredible. This is the Dutch style, the Cape Dutch style buildings that we have at the property. And that's what they want to, they're working to currently restore Backsburg to be more like this. And then also, like, you kind of can like have a day at the life of the 17th century like Cape, and they want to bring that to life because Karen Roos is one of the ex like Elle Decor editors, and so she's just very intentional with her design, and she actually created this label, which I want to be able to explain it to you more detail, but we just, as Zach knows, we just got this wine into Michigan, but we also just got it into the States. So I'm still waiting on like the perfect story. So when I have that, Zach, I will send it to you and you can forward it to everybody, because I don't want to make something up, because I'm sure there's a beautiful reason for this label. And I don't like lying, as Jerry will tell you. And
we
then
really love the label, by the way. It
yeah,
made an
isn't the
impact
label
on our
great?
staff as we opened it. Yeah, no, it's
Yeah,
great.
the label is beautiful. Like, I believe that there are persimmons around the sides. The cows, the pig, and I don't know what kind of bird that is. That's the other thing too. I really just don't want to make it up. But the persimmon trees are actually, it's spring now. So, or yeah, it's going to be spring now-ish. So like things are starting to I guess that's more of a wintry fruit, but they're starting to change, and the trees are very deciduous over there. So it's kind of cool to see everything, but in the opposite spectrum. And then over here, we actually just finished in 2019, everything's shifted with 2020, but we just finished the subterranean wine tunnel. So in our production space, you can walk from our cellar to our like bottling area facility. But this is just a picture of Charles with like all these, I think these are 400-liter fjords from France that we bring in. And then this is the spice room, which I'm told that every spice in the world grows in here, and you can have dinners in here and stuff. I find that only hard to believe because I haven't been there, but I imagine that they're not lying to me. So you can have these beautiful meals in there as well. These are just some other pictures that I thought were really like all encompassing of what Babylonstoren has to offer. Not only is it the farm and vineyard, but we also like offer a lot of spa services in the spa and the hotel. You can make your own soaps with our olive oil and the herbs, and like salt scrubs and like all this other stuff. More of the tasting room. Like, this is what a formal tasting looks like in the tasting room. This is just a bird's eye view of what the gardens look like. And it's how to like more like French Versailles British gardens look like, because they want to take that much intent in designing all of this. One of our restaurants, we have 3 on the property, as I mentioned. And then we also, in addition, as Zach knows, to the wine, we also make olive oil and a non-alcoholic aperitif called Bitterlecker, in addition to balsamic vinegar. And so just they're constantly creating at Babylonstoren. I think one of my favorite quotes from Charles here on the left is, we hire people that only want to constantly create and come to us with solutions. And if they have a problem, make sure that they come with a solution as well. Like, so it's always constantly trying to talk more about it. Just cut me off because I can go on.
I'm going to, Nadine, if you're all right. So the Bitterlecker, by the way, is just fantastic for anybody who, thank you for everybody who's been listening. This Bitterlecker we just started carrying, and that's actually in some ways what like paused us at first when we were introduced by Jerry at AHD to this company. And it is really cool to see the non-alcoholic stuff take off. But this is one of those non-alcoholic drinks that like I really encourage everybody to check out. The idea of aperitifs with all these botanicals and hearing the story of how much is growing on the farm, it kind of in some ways makes sense, especially when you taste it, because there's so many layers in this drink. And similar to this wine, I don't know about everybody else, but I think this is really beautiful and like so soft. And as I don't know if anybody watched, but I sat there and tasted through everything very quickly while Nadine was talking, and you guys are all in for some treats. It's really it's a beautiful wine for pairing. We spend a lot of time at Mongers trying to find softer wines, things that aren't going to have quite the punch that some of the California wines has, and this is so right on the nose for that. Nadine, before we pass it over to Idyll Farms for a little bit, do you have any things that you would like for us to know before we let you go for a second? Any last words? about this stuff?
I just want to thank you for trying us out. We're brand new to Michigan, and this is a brand new wine for us. And we appreciate how easily translatable it is and how beautiful it is to you. Not actually translatable because it is hard to say. Soetmelksvlei. But I mean, I think really we're a small team in general. And I think knowing that our team can sustainably grow these grapes and create this beautiful wine with so much chemistry, so much determination, so much intention. And for people like you all who really appreciate wine, cheese, etc., it means a lot that we can kind of play with the big boys in a way. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And we appreciate the labor that goes into it. Handpicking, I know you mentioned that earlier. To me, that's like number one in many ways. I think you can taste the love and intention that goes into it, which is a perfect segue to Idyll Farms, where we have the cheesemaker, we have the owner, both on this call today, and I'm super excited. We've worked with Idyll Farms since day one. I might even go as far as to say it was the first sample that I requested when we started the business. I mean, it was before we were a pop-up business, and I was like, please send me cheese. I've been hearing about you. And so since the very beginning, Idyll's been like, dare I say, a partner. They've been really influential, and we're so thankful to work with them. And they hand ladle the cheeses, which is something I always talk about with the fresh ones, only because it's a perfect job to give a gregarious cheesemonger who won't stop talking when they visit your creamery. So I've done it, and it's hard work, and everything about it is hard work. And I want to go ahead and introduce Melissa, who's visiting or who's on the call with us, who does all of that hard work and leads it up. And we also have Amy on the call, so a lot of resources. We're very excited to answer questions about Idyll, and we also have a quick video to show you a day in the life of Idyll, if Benji doesn't mind queuing that up as an intro before we turn it over to these lovely ladies.
Yes, let me get that.
Thank you, Benji.
Everybody, not a problem.
And yeah, I think we're going to have to take a trip to South Africa when travel restrictions change. Maybe the Mongers first, our first Mongers trip.
All sounds lovely.
Kim called the free staff ticket, so sorry, Will, you're going to have to pay.
Did everyone see my screen? Is this happening or now?
Yeah, it's happening. It's black right now. Yeah, there we go.
Great. Beautiful.
Absolutely. So before I turn it over to you guys, I just want to say, I hope all of you guys are enjoying this cheese, and have been eating cheese this whole time, by the way, but the cream line on the piece I have is just perfect. It's such a It's a beautiful cheese. Melissa, would you mind walking us through some of the, like, I don't know, farming practices or things that you think like set you guys apart and make it so special as it is?
Sure. So I think the thing that sets Idyll Farms apart is really our, the pastures and, taking care of the animals. Our pastures, we get we're in northern Michigan, so about 120 to 140 days a year on pasture if we're lucky. When they're out there, right now they're on alfalfa, which is awesome. It brings up the fat and the protein and the solids, which makes that cheese just, it just brings out the flavor. Our milk is so fresh because we are farmstead. Tomorrow I'm going to make cheese and the milk will be, this milk will be 12 hours and I'll be putting brand new fresh milk on that batch of cheese. A lot of people are buying milk that's getting trucked in and it's, it could have sat for up to 7 days. And that really sets us apart. Our feed is, we buy all organic grain. We only grain to keep them in milk. We're using a barley and oats rich grain instead of fillers like corn. We use just enough molasses to bind it together and get them some more minerals. That's all about quality of milk instead of quantity. We could boost our quantity with more grain, but we choose to just go for the highest quality and keep the goats as healthy as possible. Like I said, our pasture, they're in the pasture every day in the summer. We're usually out, we try to get out April, May through, we'll probably be in pasture until October this year. It looks like the weather's going to hold out for us. They do 2 paddocks a day. So they go out, they eat, they're eating that alfalfa right now. Then they lay down, they ruminate, they drink water. And then in the afternoon, we move them to the next side of the pasture. They eat, they ruminate, they lay down for a while, and then they come in for their milking. And it really helps them absorb all those nutrients and move through their system and gives us the best quality milk. Another thing you had talked about the hand ladling, and that's another thing that kind of sets us apart. The hand ladling really gives us the texture of our cheese. People always say, it's so fluffy, and it's just because it's not getting compressed or beat up or broke up through machines. It just gives you a totally different quality of cheese. People always think, goat cheese, it's going to taste earthy or goaty. And really our cheese is very fresh for the last few days when you're eating our cheese. And like I said, everything we're using is, all natural ingredients. And that I really think that sets us apart from some other cheeses. And Amy, do you have anything?
Yeah, I mean, Melissa spoke a lot about the pastures, and she's really discounting everything that she does to manage those pastures. As Melissa is our cheesemaker as well as our farm manager, so she is really managing every component of this vertically integrated system. So she is not only responsible for the soil quality that's growing the grasses that we're planting. Some of them are wild, some of them we're intentionally planting, and managing future pastures with cover crop methods, and taking invasive species out, maybe plants that could be toxic to goats, such as milkweed or old cherry trees that produce a cyanide in their leaves. We're in the cherry capital of the world, go figure. But so she's in charge of managing those pastures. And we put as much effort and emphasis on managing those pastures as we do as in the cheese making process. So we're really wanting to be a part of this regenerative agricultural movement, which is regrowing and making the soil a better quality than when we started with it, with our rotational grazing methods and our compost management on those pastures. We're using the whey, which is a byproduct of our cheese making, also on those pastures to recycle all of that byproduct of the cheese making back into the cycle of our process. And every pass through that those goats are going through each paddock and each pasture, it's making it better and better for the next year, and sequestering the carbon into the soil, which is, all these buzzwords we're hearing about nowadays. We've been doing it now pretty much since we started. We've been making goat cheese for 8 years now. And just now, your people are learning more about these rotational grazing methods and how it's sequestering carbon from the atmosphere and thereby reducing the carbon in the atmosphere and reversing the climate change. So we're really making, the earth a better place than when we started, just through our cheese making process. So we're really proud of everything, not only our cheeses that we're making, but the process that we're doing it. And so I think that really sets us apart from other cheesemakers as well.
And Amy, are you sitting in front of a wall of awards that you guys have won? Because it certainly looks
Yes,
like a bunch of beautiful recipes.
Melissa really should be standing in front of this, but you might have seen pictures of her at ACS with all of the ribbons on her neck.
I have.
We did win more goat cheese awards in 2017, the last ACS concert or contest in 2019, than any other goat cheese producer in North America. And some of our competitors, I'm sure you've heard of some of our competitors, on either coast, and they've been around for 30, 40 years. And we have basically just started and into our 8th year of cheese making. So I think we've accomplished a lot in the last 8 years, and we really wanted to do it the right way. And we kind of learned along the way. We brought in French consultants to get us started, but they were doing things the French way and not really to American kind of dairy standards. And so a lot of the things that we had initially started with, we've had to tear up and redo, at least in our creamery operations, and make sure that everything was compliant with US standards. So Melissa has learned through, mistakes, and learned through, the old school methods up until, American methods. So it's, we've really accomplished a lot.
You really have.
Yeah.
It's been amazing to taste along with you. And sorry to cut you off, but just as somebody who's been buying your cheese for, I guess we've been around for 5 years now. So I've had, of your 8 years, I've been tasting for 5 years, and each year it just gets better, just period. It's just better and better. And it's really exciting to have such an award-winning creamery in our own backyard, so to speak. I know it's a little farther away from us than our backyard, but it's still within state. And I think, we've talked before, but Michigan is such an agricultural state, and I think Wisconsin sometimes overshadows us, but Michigan has such amazing dairy. You guys are such a case in point. And it's, we're so thankful to be able to represent, friends in state that make such great cheese. So
thank you.
Kim, as our resident farm expert tonight, do you have any questions you wanted to hear Amy and Melissa talk about? Or does anybody in the audience, by the way? Yes, she does.
Melissa, I heard you reference the alfalfa and how you think that affects the flavor of the cheese. What can you tell us about what they are eating throughout the season, and kind of how the milk changes from your perspective throughout the season?
So early year, we start them on the grass. It's the best for their systems. But they naturally have a higher fat after they kid. So spring milk is extremely fun and can be a little challenging, but a lot of fun. We get into the summer. Alfalfa comes out a little later than the clover and a lot of the grasses. So we start on the clover, which is kind of works hand in hand with that already naturally high fat and protein. So, you know, it gives them a nice little boost, keeps things steady. But then when they get on the alfalfa, that's my favorite time of the year. And we can usually get about 3 rotations a year on our alfalfa field. And this year we're able to finish in the alfalfa field. So I'm really excited about our fall milk this year. Because this is the first time I think this has happened in a while, because we normally hay the whole thing and then you know, we use it in the winter, but we had enough to get through for the winter. So that's what they're doing. Our biggest things are generally start on grass. We love our clovers up here, and then as much alfalfa as we can get throughout the year, especially, you know, during the summer, July and August, when the solids are fairly low. We try to get them on that alfalfa because great flavors and just, you know, gives a lot more energy and a lot higher solids. Makes a lot better cheese.
Can you
So
tell us
anything you
anything?
can get in our fall milk will be really. What's that?
Can you tell us anything about how Idyll Gris came to be this specific cheese?
Amy?
Sure. Yeah, so it originally started, we actually won our first ACS award with this cheese back in 2014, and it actually had an olive tapenade in the middle of it. So, but we were kind of doing that in-house. We weren't using ingredients that were kind of third-party audited. So it was kind of like this, you know, cheese we could sell at farmers market, but we couldn't really market it elsewhere until we really tested out every single ingredient that was in there. So we just started making kind of the classic one with the ash in the middle, just because it was an easy ingredient to use, and it just started, you know, taking off. So it has won, let me see, 2016 it won a world championship cheese contest first place. 2017 it won 2 different first places in 2 different categories at ACS, second and third place in 2018 at ACS, third place in 2019 at ACS, and a world championship cheese contest first place in 2020. There haven't been a lot of cheese competitions since then, but it was also like, you know, Culture magazine, like cheese of the year. And, you know, it looks a lot like one of our competitors, you know, Humboldt Fog. But when we've been put up next to them in competition, we outwin them every single time. Some of our competitors that are in the bigger scale now, they freeze their curds before they make it into cheese. And, you know, a lot of people might not notice a difference, especially if it's a little more aged, because it develops more of a creaminess or cream line to it. But if you taste our cheese side by side, I think you might really notice a difference.
You're being very sweet and politically minded. I'm going to go ahead and just say I sell this as Humboldt Fog in the 80s or 90s. I tell people, I'm like, this is what Humboldt Fog probably tasted like before you knew it existed.
Right.
Because that scaling up in production just makes you, you know, not to besmirch Cypress Grove, which has done so much for the industry, but
Yeah.
like you said, you have to make different decisions when you're trying to sell cheese to the world or the country as opposed to your region. And so, yeah, we love this stuff. It's so special.
Thank you. And it is going to be a little bit different every time you taste it because of the milk, because of the fats in the milk. The rind might be a little bit more slippery during different times of the year. And that just means we're a seasonal, artisanal, you know, a cheese product that the goats' bodies are changing, their milk changes, the grass, the terroir changes. So it's going to change the cheese too. So we can't be like McDonald's and the same every single time that you taste it. So, and that's the exciting thing about cheese, you know, it evolves. So you could get a really young Idyll Gris. It's going to taste completely different a week later than when you first buy it. So, so that's the fun thing just at home to do, is just, you know, buy a couple different cheeses in different ages and see what the difference and what stage you like it to be at. Ours just happen to have the make date on the bottom. So you can see exactly how old your cheeses that you're eating, at least the surface, you know, all of our cheeses have the make date on them. So you can see when that cheese is made. And so you can kind of determine, oh, I really like it at 3 weeks old, or I really like it at 4 weeks old, or I should just throw it out when it's 5 weeks old, or whatever you want to do. But it's a personal preference and taste.
And I know Zach answered it in the chat, but there was a question that for those who aren't paying attention to the chat, how does winter have an impact on your production? And we know you do pause it at a point, and tell us kind of about what happens there.
I can tell you anecdotally that as we get
Melissa,
to oh, sorry, go.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, as we get to the holidays,
Sorry.
it's always this like race
hear me?
between the holidays and the end of the season. So we're always like, how long we get it onto your, definitely make sure you get this on your Thanksgiving tray, because it might not make it to your Christmas tray. But Melissa, please fill us in a little bit more.
Yeah, so where, you know, when the Idyll Gris won, especially the first time it got the best in show in the world, and I that cheese just, it really took off. You know, like we said, we do shut down for a couple months in the winter to let the goats have a little maintenance period before they start milking again. But the Idyll Gris is one of the first cheeses that, you know, people generally will want, probably just because of how many awards it's had.
Well, he was just asking when we shut down production too. We do give our goats a little break before they start to kid. So they generally dry themselves off in December, and then we stop production. It's a little bit different every year according to when our breeding season is. So there might be a lag time before we start making cheese again. So yes, I definitely would recommend, like, Thanksgiving is a good time to get it on your menu, because it might be in limited supply after that. And we do make a small version of our Idyll Gris called Idyll Puck now, that's the same size and shape as a Hoggy Puck. So it's a 4-ounce version of our Idyll Gris, but it's going to be a completely different kind of aging process because of the smaller format. So if you like the big fluffy cake, like, you know, you want to get the 1-pounder Idyll Gris. But if you want to have a kind of a single serving, then you can get the 4-ounce. And I think you guys carry both of them at different times. Yeah. Oh, you're muted.
Cannot hear
I
you.
muted myself so I can eat crackers here and there. I apologize, everybody. I'm trying to make sure you don't hear me chew the whole night. The freedom to be able to eat during this is too tempting for me. But yes, we do carry Mount Idyll, Idyll Puck, the pasture lineup. We really try to rotate through all the cheeses. We just we love your stuff. So thank you guys so much. Thank you, friends, so much.
Thank you.
Kim, what can you tell us about the next couple cheeses? And I hope everybody's eating and enjoying. I haven't seen a lot of questions, but please let us know if you guys have any thoughts. And Kim, why don't you take it away with Cabra LaMancha?
Yeah, so the next cheese that we're going to be tasting is made by FireFly Farms. And this cheese is no longer a farmstead cheese. So all of the milk comes from 10 farms, which are located within a 30-mile radius of the Creamery. And these are all Amish family farms. So all of the milk is sourced from these families, and there is a contract that the families need to sign that regards the animal husbandry, restricts the use of any sort of hormones or antibiotics, chemical fertilizers, and really just ensures the quality of the milk. But it also ensures a fair price for the milk. The farmers are not penalized for a lack of milk in winter or the surplus of milk that occurs in the summer, because the goats themselves will cycle naturally throughout the year and of course produce much more milk in the height of summer than toward the end of the season, they are just going to receive the same price throughout the season. And nothing at FireFly is certified organic. And this is a really interesting thing because organic certification in the cheese world is a lot different from organic certification in the vegetable world. It encompasses all aspects of the process and every step in the process. So the land that the animals are raised on has to be certified organic. All the food that they consume has to be certified organic. All of the facilities, everything about the cheese making process and afterward. So once the cheese comes to the shop, if we get an organic cheese and we cut a piece of it for you, it is not technically organic any longer, just because we would have to have a certified organic process to even cut that cheese. So it's really specific, but it's also very pricey. And cheese, of course, is intended to make money from a product that already is very, very low margin. It's very difficult to make money by selling cheese, by selling milk. So it's really very difficult and pricey to get organic certification as a creamery. But with that in mind, all of the animals at FireFly have free access to pasture and hay grown on the site that is supplemented with grain that is non-GMO. The rennet that they use is non-GMO. There's no frozen curd involved in this cheese making process. So it's really just a good snapshot of this 30-mile radius in Maryland where these goats are raised. And then, of course, all of these cheeses are made by hand. So it's another really excellent reflection of traditional cheese making practices and how the profiles would have been, 100 or 200 years ago. And, again, all of the leftover whey is recycled into the system. And because the animals are not raised on site, it doesn't just get dumped on the ground at the creamery, but it is donated to any farmers who want to have access to the whey in the area. So vegetable farmers can come pick up some free whey to put on the fields. So it's a really cool operation, but it's also a really good picture of what these goat's milk cheeses would have been like in the past as well.
Kim,
And
real quick, I just wanted to mention, you mentioned the whey, and I know Amy and Melissa mentioned whey as well.
Yeah.
And I just think that it's worth highlighting for everybody at home that like whey disposal is, many people just dump it, right? Move on with your life. You're making cheese. Who cares about the whey? It's really hard on the environment. It's incredibly acidic. And so there are municipalities that have ordinances against dumping whey down your actual drain because it's corrosive to pipes and different, cement. I've actually been to creameries where you can see the like trough of the whey going down the cement floor into the floor drain because of the acid over years. And so, instead of taking something that could actually be harmful for the environment, reutilizing it into being a positive for the environment is it's powerful. And I think it's really important that we highlight the people who take that extra effort to do it, because they're taking it a step beyond safe disposal to like, let's use every ounce of energy that these animals have put forth. So kudos.
I just want to also mention that we do sometimes have pigs on our property. So we do use the whey for our pig production. And that was kind of an employee bonus last year, is everybody got a pig. And if you're familiar with Parmesan cheese or Parma ham comes from the Parmesan cheese whey. So that's kind of the popular version of, another way to reuse whey. And a lot of countries like Switzerland make the whey into drinks, soft drinks, and that might be a plan for us in the future if we can figure that one out.
Cool.
Yep.
Yeah, it's just also interesting to think about how disconnected we are from the practices of the past. I mean, there would be no issue with whey if so much cheese wasn't industrialized, because there wouldn't be so much whey just put into the system all at once. On a regular farm, you would have pigs or whatever.
Totally.
Yeah. And the cheese itself is inspired by some of the Basque wash drying cheeses. So I'm sure you can smell the bee linens in the rind. There's also salt and I think a little bit of vinegar that goes into that wash. So it's a really, really beautiful profile. And it is hand washed and flipped for about 90 days.
I also just want to take a moment, Amy mentioned earlier how the cheeses of Idyll Farm changes throughout the years. And it's the same thing with all the cheeses today, because they're also naturally made and I guess made in concert with nature. But it's crazy to see Cabra LaMancha. We haven't carried it for a while. If anybody's ever bought it from us, you would have had to shop with us at the farm field station. So 3-4 years ago, and the cheesemongers who had seen it before at the counter were all like, "Oh my God, this is the same cheese," because batch to batch it can change. And if you haven't been eating every batch along the way and you haven't seen it for 3 years, it's like a totally different cheese at this point. And for the better, it's been awesome. That's a really cool creamery, and we've been not quite as close with them as we are with Idyll because they're in a different state, but it's been awesome to see them grow. And it's just a beautiful cheese. I think it's showing well tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Also, we're going to talk about pairings in a little bit. We have 2 more cheeses to talk through, but I want to encourage people, if anybody hasn't been make sure you're trying each cheese with both wines. Also, the apricot is a really fun, it changes what the whole experience is if you try it with the apricot. The Idyll Gris, the apricot, and a little white wine was probably my favorite so far, but I hope you guys are trying things.
I would even say hold some cheese for the chocolate at the end as well, as some of these have really good connections with that.
Yeah, Benji, thank you.
All right. And before we move on to the dancing fern, I just wanted to take a couple minutes to talk about a few terms that you might hear in this industry. So a term that you hear a lot is regenerative agriculture. And this is sort of a blanket term that describes organic, biodynamic, permaculture, any sort of agricultural system that works to put nutrients back into the system and strengthen the ability of that biome to self-regulate and regenerate. So instead of subtracting from the land, these practices aim to be net positive for nutrient content in the soil, for the whole health of the ecosystem. Because farming at this point can be pretty tough for everything in the ecosystem that isn't the specific plant that is being planted at that site, and especially animals and insects and all those other little guys that get in there. And then biodynamic is a term that you will hear a lot more in the wine world than the cheese world. Just for a little reference, there are currently over 700 producers of biodynamic wine in the world, but 4 creameries, according to the website that keeps track of that, whose name I can't remember right now. But this term was coined by Rudolf Steiner. It is based on his work that he did in the 1920s. The official definition is a spiritual, ethical, ecological approach to agriculture, gardens, food production, and nutrition. And it sees the farm as one living organism. And the goal is to integrate all levels of plant and animal kingdoms to harmonize these various elements and allow them to build off of one another.
Where did he coin that term? Is he a Frenchman? Is that correct?
He's not. I don't remember where he's from.
The reason I bring this
I
up,
think
I
he's
lived in
German.
Napa.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah.
I lived in Napa for a year at some point, and it always blew my mind because Napa, like California in general, we're the center of the universe. And I think that biodynamic sounds so much like hippie culture from the 60s that we assume that it came out of something like that, but it's Germany in the 1920s. And biodynamic is a crazy concept in some of the coolest ways. Everything from what Kim is saying, if your pond downstream is unhealthy, there's no way your grapes are healthy or the grass. And then but it also takes it to like another level where you're, burying a sheep horn full of manure and the, west lawn and a full moon. And, it gets pretty cool and weird in the nicest ways. But yeah, biodynamic always blows my mind.
That is something to note in the biodynamic practice that I think kind of differentiates it from these other terms, is that there are some very specific recipes that are supposed to be employed in this system. Permaculture, which I'll talk about in a minute, is really kind of like wherever you are, you figure out how to do that thing. And the biodynamic practice is much more specific and kind of stringent with regard to how you run that farm. And so permaculture was developed by two men, Bill Mollison and David Holmgren, in the 70s. And they, again, wanted to implement regenerative agriculture, but they strove to do this by mimicking the systems that already existed in nature. So permaculture really focuses on learning from nature and learning from the people of the past. Traditional societies are going to be a big focus if you study permaculture at any level. Because these societies were forced to live a lot more closely with nature than we are at this time, there's just a lot to learn about how to really efficiently run a regenerative agricultural practice. And just as an example, the chinampas, which were developed by the Aztecs in ancient Mexico, are still to this day the most productive agricultural system ever to be developed. That has the highest total food yield of any agricultural practice. And it was a really genius practice. I mean, they were in these waterways and took the muck from the bottom of the waterways and grew the plants directly in that muck. So you always have fertilizer available to spread onto the plants. And then when you're ready to harvest, you can just load the harvest into the canoe and take it straight to market. And it's just so simple, but so incredible. So that's really indicative of what permaculture strives to do. And that term itself is a conjunction of the words permanent and agriculture. So it is really intentional, focused agriculture that really should be unique to your location on Earth, your circumstances, and your experiences. All right.
Kim, I just wanted to jump in. I love what you just said about permaculture. I've, in a couple different instances when we've talked about cheese history, or if anybody's ever sat through the TEDx that I got to do many years ago and talk about cheese, it's always this like answer to the set of variables you have in the where you are in the environment, right? Making cheese at the top of the Swiss Alps in summer has a whole set of different issues than making cheese in lowland Europe or lowland England on the coast, right? Things like hand salting versus brine salting often is more of a product of how hard it is to get salt to where you are than it is anything else. And I think we sometimes take for granted the thousands of decisions you have to make when you're making a natural product. Kind of to Amy's earlier point, like McDonald's makes French fries the same all throughout the world. The French fries, what's important, and I think cheese is so beautiful, and it's, at least in the world of cheese that we come to celebrate, where it's the answer to how do I make cheese on this mountain? How do I make cheese on this farm with these animals? And I think that, at its best, it's a taste of place, terroir, a term that gets thrown around so often. But yeah, I just wanted to echo what you were saying.
Yeah. So I was going to dive into the dancing fern next, unless there's anything else you think we should get into.
No, I think, I hope everybody's looking at the chat a little bit. There's been some good comments about, the expense of these third-party certifications are not small for small farms. I mean, it is it's a real impact. And in terms of pairings, I just want to shout out to check who said it, to Cassandra, who was saying how interesting both wines are. And I really encourage you guys, if you haven't been tasting them both with the cheeses, we don't always hit it so perfect, but really both wines hold up to all the cheeses, and you can kind of choose your own adventure. And I think it's remarkable to see your wine preferences play out in certain ways. They're both the right answer, red and white. It kind of comes out to what you like. And we'll talk a little bit about pairing after we get to the end of the cheese. So I'll stop speaking so we can keep moving.
Cool. All right, so up next we have the Sequatchie Cove Dancing Fern. And Sequatchie Cove is another just super cool creamery. But before being a creamery, they are first and foremost a total farm. So the animals are on the farm for sure. But the Sequatchie Cove family farm or something, I think is separate from the creamery in terms of you can go and look at their website and watch really cool videos about everything that they do there. But they also are really focused on the cows that live on that farm. So this is a really, really awesome cheese. It is a Reblochon style cheese. And Reblochon is from Savoie in France. So this is the southeastern part of the country, the western portion of the Alps, where France, Italy, and Switzerland all kind of meet. And traditionally that cheese was made with the second milking of the day. So that yields a much higher butterfat content and just really makes a rich, buttery, creamy cheese. And so Sequatchie Cove is out of Tennessee. Tennessee is a bit different from Savoie, but the cheese is made in the same way. So it is a raw milk cheese. The curd is very lightly pressed. It's brine washed. It's aged for right at 60 days. Reblochon traditionally is aged for 50 to 55 days. So it's really difficult to find this cheese in the States. There are some importers that will ask producers to wait the extra 5 days so that they can send some into the country. But Dancing Fern just hits that legal limit of 60-day aging for raw milk so that it can be distributed in the States. And with this really different environment, when Sequatchie started to make this cheese, they knew they wanted to make a Reblochon style cheese. They started with Devon cattle. And this is actually, I'm pretty sure, the cow that is their sort of company logo. It really looks like a Devon cow to me. Traditionally, Reblochon is made with abondance, which is an animal really known for adaptation to extreme temperatures. And then the milk is just really great for making cheese rich in fat and protein. Montbéliard and Parenthèse. So all three of these are just awesome, awesome animals as far as milk production goes. And Sequatchie really wanted to mimic this by using such a creamy, wonderful milk from the Devon cattle. But what they found was that these cows had a really hard time adapting to life in Tennessee. It was really hot there. And they just really were suffering. Their milk production was really down. These cows don't give a lot of milk anyway. And with the stress from the environment, they just weren't producing a lot of milk. So instead, they started bringing in some breeds from New Zealand that are known for doing really well in high heat environments. And then also brought in some Jerseys and some Montbéliard, so the same breed that's used in Reblochon, some Normand and Parenthèse. So again, another Reblochon breed. And at this point in the farm, all of the cows have been born on the farm. So they are slowly over time attempting to breed animals that are really well adapted to that specific environment, to that specific area in the United States. So they're using a very traditional recipe, but they're also sort of developing an American tradition in cheese making. You know, it's been, I think, about 20 years that they've been slowly raising these herds and developing their cheese making practices. So we're really seeing a new American cheese making tradition forming, which is very cool.
Very cool.
Yeah. And of course the cheese is delicious. It's just so good. And you know, Savoie is a really beautiful place in the world. There are very rich glacial soils and water runoff from that mountain snow melt. And and traditionally it was populated by families who owned other animals and grew food. So Sequatchie is kind of doing that same thing in their valley. So they have all of this drainage coming from alluvial fans, all of these smaller bodies of water coming together with really loamy soil, really rich, beautiful soil. And they're practicing a bunch of rotational plantings. So they are really intentional about where the cows will graze and how to prepare certain fields for the animals to come there. They have a lot of land and they will grow certain plants back to back to make sure that they are not overstressing the land, that they are enriching it further, and just making it really, really healthy.
Hey, Kim, real
yeah.
quick, you mentioned as they transition to the hybridization of these like now southern cows, the milk yields changing. And I just wanted to highlight, if I recall correctly, Paget, who's the cheesemaker who we were talking to, she said the yield got so low it was almost similar to a goat, didn't she? It was like which is, there's a huge difference between milking cows and goats, right? Like it's an order of magnitude different between especially if you're talking about like a Holstein or one of the classic milk machines. So I just wanted to highlight that, like, that's an economic reality that's real for a small creamery. Also, we had a cool question, and I wanted you to see if you were comfortable answering raw milk in America. I know that there's a lot of discussion about raw milk. Where do we land in the States in terms of raw milk production? Where is it legal? Where is it not? Can you fill us in a little bit?
On the whole, raw milk laws still vary state to state. But generally speaking, if it is permitted at all, you have to purchase it directly from the farm. And then, to be able to purchase a cheese made from raw milk, it has to be aged for 60 days. So, this cheese is aged for 60 days. It is now street legal in the United States, but at 59 days, still no dice.
Michigan is a state where you can buy raw milk through a cow share in terms of raw, like fluid milk. But that's the only way you can obtain it. In California, where I lived for a while, you could go into the grocery store and buy a pint of raw cow's milk, goat's milk, sheep's milk. I worked at a bougie grocery store, so you could even go down to the species of cow if you wanted. But Michigan is still by cow share only, I believe.
How does that differ from Europe? So obviously we're used to hearing that the illegal shipments coming over of raw milk cheeses. So what are the European rules so people can see that difference come to life in America?
Benji, I'm happy you asked that, because I think that we tend to use Europe as this like blanket statement, like, oh, Europe does it better. But the difference between like the French cheese laws and Ireland cheese laws are bigger than they are in America, right? Ireland is a country that for years now has been really pushing at that 60-day rule and has been, I don't want to use the word threatening, but it sounds like Ireland is the closest in the EU to becoming a pasteurized only country. While France is still celebrating cheeses that are made raw in under 60 days. And, each country has its own kind of position based on their history with that, right? Like the UK is so influenced by post-World War II dairy realities, right? In World War II, we were pooling all of the country's dairy and getting you dairy for the war effort, which meant that you had to pasteurize everything because you're getting it from every little farm and just pooling it. That is not safe unless you pasteurize. And so history dictates so much of the cultures around this. To say Europe does X is just, it's impossible. But much of Europe is much more comfortable with this with raw milk without the 60-day rule. And I won't get into the very large political discussion that is raw milk in this country, because it's heated, right? It's still going on to this day. There are books written about it. I have a book on my shelf that I haven't yet gotten to, which is called America's War on Artisan Cheese. It's a large discussion, and it really starts with Upton Sinclair's The Jungle and that time period. And my favorite thing to say is that if you make cheese with clean milk, it doesn't matter pasteurized or raw. And if you make cheese with dirty milk, someone's going to get sick regardless of pasteurized or raw. And so, all these cheesemakers and people we're talking about, they're working really hard to make sure the milk is clean, and you can't make good cheese out of bad milk, period. Pasteurization and all these things aside. I hope that shed a little light on that.
Yeah, and it is just much harder to make good raw milk cheese in an industrial setting than it is in a smaller setting. So it, again, I think in the United States reflects back on what our actual cheese making history is in this country compared to France. Louis Pasteur was eating a ton of raw milk, I'm sure, eating a ton of raw milk cheeses when he discovered these microbes that exist. So I think,
yeah.
Yeah.
And the last thing I want to say is I think it's interesting, and I am not a history buff, so feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the transportation of milk down the rail line precedes the refrigeration of milk, right? We were transporting it away from where it was made for a lot longer than we were doing it the right way. And so we needed to figure out pasteurization because we were moving milk away from the farms. Like Amy's milk doesn't leave less than a 2-mile radius probably, let alone going down to coming from Northport to middle of state or something like that, which is what was happening at the turn of the century. So Amy, how far?
It moves about 15 feet, I think, from the milking parlor to the pasteurizer.
That's amazing. That is truly.
But we do make a raw milk cheese too, which I think Mongers Provisions carries on occasion
I think we have
too.
on the case right now.
Yeah, it's called Temptation. So we do.
Yeah, we have that.
Yeah. So we are familiar with the raw milk guidelines, and as well as all the other guidelines, which Americans have tried to. They tried to ban the use of wooden boards, which have an intrinsic property in the wood to like antibacterial properties. And we had just gotten these beautiful wood boards. Melissa, I can't remember the name of the wood that we actually got, but it was harvested in a full moon, in the middle of winter, so that the sap had run down into the roots, and we had just ordered these beautiful wooden boards for our raw milk cheese, and then the FDA was trying to ban wooden boards, a couple years ago. So it was a lot of artisan producers have got on their on their soapboxes, and we protested, and so that was all reversed because they've shown that these specific wooden boards are better for the cheese, and less bacteria is produced on the cheeses because of the antibacterial properties of the wood. So anyway, there's a lot of little intricacies in the American hygienic things and the old world methods that have proven themselves between the copper kettles and the wooden boards and all that stuff. So anyway, sorry.
The battle
I got off
continues.
on a
No,
tangent.
thank you, Amy. No, you're on the front lines of it all. We appreciate your perspective.
Definitely. Yeah. So, and I think also that it's important to note that these creameries that are choosing to use pasteurized or raw or whatever also are probably considering what gave them the better results with the cheese. So some cheeses you may find in your cheese making life do not lend themselves better to raw milk than pasteurized milk. So every cheese is a unique experience.
Exactly. And some people,
Yeah.
some of the cheeses, you can't tell the difference. The average person cannot tell the difference between a pasteurized milk cheese and a raw milk cheese. So some of it doesn't really make a difference. So it's just a matter of a personal preference too.
Yeah, very true.
Kim, what can you tell us about our last and beautiful Rispens cheese?
All right. Oh, so just one more little thing relating to
Yeah, please,
Sequatchie.
sorry.
The animals are pasture raised, as I talked about a little bit earlier. And that is by design, 100% the intention of putting so much work into developing these pastures for the cows to graze on. Pastured milk is higher in beta carotene. So this milk is going to have a richer, more buttery color to it. It is generally higher in protein, but lower in fat. It's just really, really great cheese great milk for cheese making. And it also provides you with a real taste of the place that this milk is coming from. We talked about a little bit with Idyll Farms, and this is really the goal of Sequatchie, is to provide a taste of Sequatchie Cove, Tennessee, and to really create this profile of a region in American cheese making. All right, so we are to our last cheese, Rispens, and this is just such an exciting cheese. I was really excited when we got the first wheel of Rispens into the shop because it is so tasty and just so expertly made. It is a sheep's milk Gouda. It's made by Betty Coster, and most of you have probably had Lemieux's Gouda or Brabender or Black Betty, all of those incredible cheeses that she makes. And the milk comes from the Rispens family in Friesland in the Netherlands. And this specific breed is the Lacan breed, and this is the same breed of sheep that is used to make Roquefort. So this family originally raised sheep for meat, but a few years ago, their children convinced them to raise dairy sheep as well, and they helped to coordinate the purchase and transport of 300 sheep to the farm. And this is a really interesting kind of cheese making situation because there are a lot of animals in the surrounding areas of the farm, and they are not all treated with this same care. So to protect the sheep, they do not graze outside. The meat sheep can graze outside, but the milking sheep do not. And it's just a really interesting example of some of the struggles of producing really pure milk in the modern age. So why don't they graze outside? Well, one really major issue is disease from other sheep, which is a really common issue in this part of the Netherlands, and worms. The Rispens family does not treat the worms, treat the sheep for worms, because this would contaminate the milk. So to protect them from facing that kind of economic crisis, they just decided to keep them inside and give them as much space as they could and the happiest lives they could inside. So they do have a really big, extensive barn system to make sure that they have room to kind of root around and hang out. And they are still grass-fed. So the family does grow everything on site, I think, that the sheep eat. They leave naturally seeded fields available, and they're considered a sort of bird sanctuary. Birds in the area show up in kind of mid to late spring. Before this time, they take out some of the dung and spread it on the fields, and this gives a place for insects and worms and everybody else to hang out and grow, so that the birds then have something to eat, the soil is healthier, everybody wins. They even have a little body of water in the field for the birds to play in, which I thought was really sweet. And then later in the year, they systematize a cutting of these fields so that they can feed the sheep the grass from the fields, but they only do one at a time so that they don't disturb all of the habitats of the birds at once.
Kim, can I mention?
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. Finish your thought, and then I chime in for something real quick.
Oh, I was going to start somewhere else. So.
Cool. So real quick, just I want to pepper in two thoughts, which is A, for anybody who's been tasting with us for, the last year, so like Crystal and the Carps and a handful of people who are on today's call, you might remember at our Essex tasting, this cheese was like teased out. They talked about it. We hadn't even tried it yet, but Essex, who is one of our closest importers, Rachel, talked about this cheese being on the horizon. And so here it is, which is just so special to like be part of that long launch. Essex is an amazing importer, and they launch something every 5 years. They're not somebody who has like thousands of cheese in their repertoire. They're very slow and intentional. And I think it shows in how great this cheese is. I also just wanted to highlight this idea of like the sheep not being on the field. And I think that when Kim and I were talking about this tasting, we wanted to tell all of you, define a lot of terms, but we also really wanted to like, I don't know, bust the myths of what we as consumers think about when we romanticize cheese making in fields. And, Rispens is not the only cheese to be made where the animals aren't grazing on the land directly. Parmigiano Reggiano, right? We know this cheese very well. The land of Parma is so valuable because of this cheese, and the cows have an impact when they walk around a land, and so they're not generally allowed to graze on their own fields. The grass is brought to them, and similar to what Kim was describing, they live in these really large barn systems because the hoof marks would disturb the fields, and maybe you wouldn't get the same grass yield the next year. And so I think that it's so important for us as consumers to get some sense of what it's really like to do this work, because we love these beautiful pictures in our minds of, animals grazing through a field. And in some places you can do that. And in some places you just can't do that, whether it's because the field isn't suited for that or because there's disease in that field. And I just think it's so remarkable, kind of the journey that each farmer has to take to make their cheese viable in their land. So I just wanted to highlight that. Sorry.
Yeah, no. It's also a very interesting cheese from the perspective of cheese making. This is currently, according to Betty Coster, the only sheep's milk cheese exported from the Netherlands today that does not use a quick maturing starter. They use a traditional starter. And so if you have had a cheese made with a sheep's milk cheese made with this quick maturing starter, it gets a really, really sweet profile to it. A very like kind of sugary, caramely, but still kind of like rubbery, plasticky texture. The qualities of aged sheep's milk cheese are incredible and desirable, and people want to eat it. But at the same time, the kind of economic pressure on these cheesemakers has forced really early export. And so the best way for them to make the cheese that everyone wants to eat and stay in business is to use this quick maturing starter. And that was one of Betty Coster's kind of main concerns when she paired with the Rispens to make this cheese, was that she'd be able to use a traditional starter and kind of tease out these more nuanced and subtle flavors from the milk instead of getting that really intense kind of cotton candy bomb, and at the loss of the texture.
Kim, as we start to wind down, I want to talk about chocolate and pairings in a second, but I just want to highlight that Kim once again is being way more diplomatic than Betty was. Betty, when we were on a group tasting for Mongers only, Betty was straight talking shit about the world's sheep's milk cheeses, specifically Manchego. She is one of the most badass cheese people in the world, but she was just saying that, like, yeah, if you like a Manchego over 6 months, that's cool. You like rancidity, because there's a different flavor in an aged sheep's milk than a young sheep's milk. And only someone like Betty can say that with like some grace. But I just think this is a spectacular cheese and such a, it's nice to taste a different example of aged sheep's milk cheese. Kim, before I dive into a quick run through for our tasting of how we do tastings for anybody who has questions, and then a quick run through for the chocolate, is there anything else you wanted to add?
No.
Awesome. And if anybody wants to see, Amy just put in the chat about their managing of pest control, because it's the struggle is real, right? You either spray a bunch of really harmful things you don't want in your milk, or you manage it with the hardest stuff. And it's just, we're so thankful for Amy and Melissa, and for, the Rispens family and Sequatchie and FireFly for all doing it the hard way. I think that that's really how I want to highlight it, is that they all choose to make the food the hardest possible way, and we get to benefit by eating this delicious food that's a taste of Northport or the Frieslands, or Virginia area, Maryland, Virginia, or Tennessee. And I'm just so thankful to kind of taste around the world. And with that, I want to use that as a quick segue into Jamaica. I think a lot of you have the Jamaica bar. Some of you might have Ecuador, but we love chocolate. Obviously, we just went like straight up nerd level on cheese, and thank you all for joining us on that, nerd level expedition on cheese. This is the tasting I've always wanted all of our tastings to be. But chocolate for us is such a passion project. Will, our chief chocolate officer, the only C-suite in the company, he has developed an amazing lineup of chocolate, and we really focus on our chocolate in a similar way to our cheese. We want to tell these stories of people who work so hard. And chocolate has so often been misrepresented, where we talk about who made the chocolate but not where it was grown, or half the conversation. And so we work with all of our different chocolate makers to highlight and tell the story better. So we specifically focus on chocolate makers, not chocolatiers, and we focus on those who do direct import, or free trade as like the base level tops. And so Pump Street, the one you have today, is a really cool company. It's a father and daughter company out of Suffolk, England, and they were award-winning bakers before they were award-winning chocolate makers. And they make chocolate from a variety of different areas. And in this case, we have the Bachelor Hall estate. So if you think about like Idyll Farms being a farmstead creamery, this is the same idea of that in chocolate, right? If you open up a Hershey bar, even if you go a step above into like a green black, or most chocolate bars available on the grocery store aisle, you can't show me where it's from. And if you can tell me what country it's from, great. Can you tell me what city it's from, or what estate it's from? It's kind of mind blowing to think of chocolate in the same way we talk about wine, where it's like, what field did it come from? And we really hope chocolate continues to grow to that point, because it takes a lot of work to make a chocolate bar. We talked earlier about hand sorting grapes. Chocolate all starts with somebody up in a tree. There is no mechanical harvesting of chocolate. And I think that's so important to remember. Real quickly, yes, we do need a chocolate field trip. I agree with that comment. I want to run everybody real quickly through the tasting grid. I know we're towards the end, and I hope you guys have enjoyed this amazing amount of information and the amazing work that everybody puts in to feed us, right? Like, we take for granted how special our position is to tell these stories. And the reason why we get the privilege of telling these stories is because everybody else is so busy making our food, they can't tell their story. And so us as mongers are so privileged in kind of the position we get to make these tastings for you. And we just thank you all. So real quick, I hope you guys have enjoyed the tastings of the wine and the cheese. We always grade everything through a -2 to +3. I had to think about that for a second. And hopefully you tasted no negatives today. But the idea of the -2 is that orange juice and toothbrush or toothpaste in the morning, all sorts of clashing. The -1 is just that sounds. One thing is less than. Zeros is, I think, what we experience more often than anything, because we don't pay enough attention to what we're doing, right? If I'm watching television and eating cheese and chocolate, or eating cheese and wine, I'm not paying attention to the pairing. I'm watching television. If I'm driving to work, I'm not thinking about how my sandwich, the mustard's cutting through the fat of my sandwich. I'm just trying to keep the mustard out of my lap. And then +1s, hopefully we're well past that on this board, but +1s are where you start to round out things, right? If anybody who doesn't like goat cheese before they tasted any of these, maybe goat cheese with a little apricot rounds that out. That starts to be that +1. +2s end up being where we want to be. All of a sudden, everything gets a little more elevated. If you've never had a red wine and a goat cheese go well together, maybe tonight you got to experience it because of how soft that red wine was. Or if you were listening to this discussion of like tropical fruits in the red wine, but all of a sudden you tried it with everything in concert, it kind of brings it out, right? And I think that that's what positive twos are. Positive threes are culturally significant, right? So they're the port wines and Stilton, they're the Fagua and Saltern, goat cheeses of this nature with Loire Valley whites, because so much of the goat cheese culture came out of this strip of France, and so many of the wines that came out of that region are just perfect with them. And so positive threes are really special. We never aim at that. We aim at positive twos, and I hope you guys found a bunch of them on this board, because I have to say this was an absolute fantastic pairings. I know we didn't talk a lot about the pairings, but it was only because we wanted to highlight all the work these farmers are doing, and there's so many cool stories in the fields, and we at the shop talk so much about the pairings and don't talk about so much of the work Melissa and her crew has to do, and the work that, the choices that Amy and her crew makes to decide to do it the right way. And I just, I want to pause at the end to just thank everybody who attended, and thank all the people who made and at the end of their very long day, stay down at 8 p.m. to talk to us about how they did it. And so thank you all so much for it. Thank you all for our guests. This was the nerdy dream that I've had since the beginning. And so thank you all so much for it. And we're going to start to sign off, but obviously it takes us a minute to break down. So if you have further questions, stay on, hang out in the last little bit. But
Hey, Zach, before you sign off, tell us about tell us about our next tasting first.
That's why Benji's here, to slow me down. Thank you, Benji. We have another tasting live on the website right now, a taste of Michigan. I can tell you right now, there will be another cheese from Amy and her crew, because how could we possibly talk about Michigan without them? And it's a tasting that's been encouraged by many of you guys in your feedback, and also just anecdotally standing at the counter for the last 5 years. It's so exciting how loyal Michiganders are. We want to taste what's going on in the Mitten State, and we're going to go ahead and deep dive into some of the cool products that we found in the last 5 years. And please go ahead and sign up. It's probably going to be potentially our last tasting of the year, as the holidays get kind of crazy. And, I guess I can go ahead and say the new store opens, because we did do a little teasing. We're going to get busy. We're going to get a little busy. And so we're probably going to take a break from public tastings until the new year. But September is going to be the last chance for sure that you can get in on that. And so sign up. It's going to be a really fun dive into the Mitten State. What other questions do you guys have as we wind down? Anybody?
I think we are good to conclude with the you mentioned the tasting. Seems like
Cool.
Everyone is definitely satisfied and full, so I think we are in good shape.
Awesome. Well, I really want to give a special thanks. Kim did an immense amount of research for this and reached out to all these different wonderful creameries. And thank you for those who attended. Thank you for Kim for gathering so much information. Amy, Melissa, thank you guys so much for being here tonight. Kim's also on vacation, I should mention. So she did this all from her hotel room on vacation. Kim, thank you for never clocking out at Mongers. It's a real, I don't even know. Thank you so much. You did an amazing job. You're amazing. And all of you, thank you guys for always showing up. We love you from the bottom of our hearts. And as I always say, if you guys continue to show up, we'll continue to do this. So thank you all. And we'll see you at the next tasting in September.
Woo! Yeah, thank you.